Hey guys, this is my interview with Dr. James Driscoll. This is part one of the interview. Welcome to Mondays with Michaela.
What is the most interesting part of your occupation?
Right. What's the most interesting part of my, I suppose that for me, the most interesting thing is two things really. First of all, I love doing the research that I do, and I do work on river systems mainly and how river systems respond over time due to climate and tectonics. So I find that really interesting. I love doing that. But the other thing I love is the teaching part. I really, really enjoy explaining to students and getting students to understand the natural processes which are occurring all around us, and to see them understand those concepts and start to put those into practice when we do field work. That's what I love about my job. That's what I think is a really cool thing about what I do.
Did you always want to be a doctor at Monash, or did you, at the age of 16, want to do something else?
I wanted to be an earth scientist. I wanted to. I was fascinated by the earth, not just any parts of the earth, but it was like volcanoes and earthquakes and cyclones and why they formed and how they formed them, and why people live in places where there's earthquakes and volcanoes. You sort of think to yourself when you're young, you're like, why are you so dumb? And then when you actually start looking into it and you start realizing why people live with volcanoes, you then start thinking about, how can we tell if a volcano is going to erupt so we can warn people? So that fascinated me at the age of 16. So I always wanted to be an earth scientist, and I'm pretty lucky that I had a job in mind and I managed to do that job. Because people, when I was 16, laughed at me. They went, how'd you do that? You're not going to be able to do that. And I'm now 50 and I've managed to do it. So it's very good.
That's pretty cool. So what is the most important thing with your knowledge on climate change and the earth and all that? So what is the most important thing you think people should know to combat climate change?
Most important thing they need to know is that it's happening. It's not theory. The most important thing is for people to understand the science and understand the data and to rationally discuss this. So I know that people have got all these ideas about, we need to cut out fossil fuels and move to renewable energies, and these are really important. But to me, the most important thing is for the general population to be scientifically literate enough in order to appreciate the science, understand the data. That to me is the most important thing, because without a groundswell of support, you know what it's like, it's that when you're trying to explain this to people, they're often people feel so disengaged or feel as if they're not able to make changes to change the way we're going. And it can make you feel really insignificant. But if we all get together and we continuously hammer on about climate change and what it means and how we know it's real, how we know it's happening, and what the consequences are in the future, to me, that's the most important thing.
I went to the GTAB when you were speaking, and you talked about a lot about Mythbusters, and it was quite passionate and inspiring to listen to. What are the top 3 myths, and how would you rebut them?
Oh, okay. Well, the first myth which I would have to bust is this idea that with weather versus climate, people don't understand often there is a difference between weather, which we experience day by day, and climate, which is what we experience on longer timescales. So the biggest myth is always got to be the first one I always debunk. The one that Trump comes out with all the time is that, it's cold for 3 days, so therefore climate change isn't happening. And part of that, which I like to explain to people, is that we have extreme cold blasts every now and again in Europe and North America because the jet stream should be going round and round, but with climate change occurring and the warming planet, it means that the temperature gradient between the poles and between the equator is getting a little bit less. And because of that, instead of the jet stream going round and round, it's starting to become a little bit lopsided, a bit like a meandering river. And when that meander is on the bottom part over you, it means it's dragging cold air down from the Arctic. So we know that that these cold blasts are a consequence of climate change. And if you can explain that to people, they kind of get it. But if they don't want to listen, like Trump and other people in politics, then yeah. So that's my number one, is trying to get people to understand the difference between climate and weather. And it's such an important thing. Secondly, volcanoes do not cause climate change. the way that people think it causes climate change. So we are not getting global warming because of CO2 being emitted by volcanoes. If you look at the data out there, and this is, again, look at the data. Look at the data, everyone. Look at the data. The data shows you that volcanoes expel probably about 80 to 85 times less CO2 into the atmosphere than us burning fossil fuels. And in fact, you may recall, I'm not sure if I mentioned it at GTAV, but volcanoes are actually responsible for global cooling when we have big volcanic eruptions for several years, up to about several years. And that's because the amount of sulfur dioxide, which is another gas which comes out of volcanoes, it kind of reacts with it reacts with water vapor in the atmosphere and forms little aerosols of sulfuric acid, and they form a haze around the Earth. And so that haze and the ash coming out of these big volcanic eruptions leads to a slight cooling on Earth for several years. So yeah, the volcanoes coming out of CO2 coming out of volcanoes being the reason why we have climate change on Earth is a big one. But the third one that really frustrates me, myth busting, and I hear this often from politicians on the TV, is that renewable energies are cheaper, more expensive than coal-powered fire stations. Complete balderdash. I mean, most of the coal-powered stations in Australia, especially in Victoria, are so old now. They're over 50, 60 years old, and they are falling apart. They need to be updated. And if you were to build a new coal power station, it would be more expensive than wind or solar. I mean, Matt Canavan is someone who keeps on going. He's a senator from Queensland, and he often comes out with that and drives me bonkers. I sit there out with the TV sometimes.
Yeah,
that would be my top three.
So out of those three myths, what do you think is the best way, what myth do you think is the most damaging in terms of its ability to lead people to reject the science?
Definitely climate versus weather. The first one I mentioned, absolutely. It's it's not a difficult concept to understand for someone who's not a scientist. It just has to be explained to non-scientists in a rational way, and to use data. Use the data to actually show why this is important. Okay, if you show them that, then I think that most rational people, if you take the irrationality out of the climate change debate, and this is where it comes to this idea of a belief system. So a belief system, people say to me often, do you believe in climate change? And I'd say, I don't believe in climate change. I know climate change is occurring. So taking out, trying to get people, a lot of people see climate change as being some quasi-religious sect or something. And it's actually very difficult to get people who don't believe in climate change to take the irrationality out of the argument and to listen to the rational, data-driven work that we do. Yeah, it's interesting. So I think that's probably the most important out of all of them, is to get people to understand the difference between weather and climate, and then they can naturally proceed on with other arguments and myths.
Yeah, absolutely. With those people that don't believe in climate change, what do you think is the best way of engaging with them to get them to believe it?
Don't engage them on social media. That's really important. There's so many trolls out there, and the climate change deniers or skeptics. I think I might prefer the word skeptics rather than deniers. Climate change skeptics. Yeah, I don't engage them on social media because it just ends up being a slanging match. The way to do it is to get them in a room and talk to them. Talk to them. Don't talk at them, but talk to them and try to be persuasive and let them talk and come out with, I may have mentioned this before, my mum and dad don't believe in climate change, and I've spent so much time and effort and shown them the data, and it's because they're just not open-minded enough. They seem to be completely closed-minded enough. That I don't understand how to get through. But often you'll get to people in a room who are climate change skeptics, and you listen to what their arguments are against the climate change, and then you start picking them up one by one, rather than you basically saying, okay, this is the data, this and this and this and this, because they don't want to hear that. They have their own preconceived ideas, and it's those that you need to change.
Yeah.
It's difficult, but it can be done.